my name is Adi from Cat Advisory, same team as Giorgio. And I think like the sort of the idea for this webinar was born from like a post that I shared on our technical blog, where I was trying to kind of consolidate all the different ways in which you can embed Copilot Studio agents into your app, regardless of whether your app is like a website, a native mobile app, server-side connector, or something else. So this is just this is the kind of evolution of that blog post, and this is just me or us as a team trying to provide some guidance on the different integration patterns that we have today available in Copilot Studio, because we can have a few, and like what would kind of make you choose one over the other. So that's really the purpose here. In terms of question, by the way, like because this can tend to be a little bit dense, like in terms of like the technical material, it's a fairly technical session. Feel free to just like either raise your hands. I'm not sure that I'll see you, but you can also unmute as far as I'm concerned. Like as long as we don't have like a couple of people talking at the same time. If there's something important, you can just ask questions. Otherwise, ask in the chat, and as Darren mentioned, Georgia will be monitoring. Okay, so this is a map that represents. Let me also just like share the blog post in the chat so you can review it later. The post has like the sort of kind of decision supporting wizard that will guide you through the different options. So this is a map that captures like pretty well, I think, the different integration patterns that we have available in Copilot Studio. And again, when I say integration patterns, at least in the context of this webinar, it's about embedding an agent in your app or in your connector, right? It's not about an agent calling external APIs or MCP servers. This is about integrating with Copilot Studio, calling Copilot Studio agents. So if we look at this as kind of like a structure or like fairly structured sort of decision process, we should ask ourselves, we can ask ourselves, where will users work? So is it a simple case where users are just interacting with the agent in Teams, or should they interact with the agent somewhere else, such as like a web app, a website, a mobile, or maybe it's not even a UI that's speaking to Copilot Studio? So this is one question. The second question is something that I tried to kind of convey here, is that there are different methods of integration, which will vary in terms of complexity. So I think like a good rule of thumb is try the simple option first, which I'll cover briefly. And if the simple options do not work, then move to the more complex ones. But there's definitely a spectrum of kind of embedding patterns, which kind of runs along like a spectrum of complexity that kind of gives you more gains, but also becomes more complicated as you depart from what we provide out of the box. Who is the audience in terms of, is this an employee-facing or a customer-facing experience? This can also impact which kind of integration pattern you'll choose, which underlying API you want to use, specifically because of authentication, but not only. And then I think the last question, how much control you need over the experience. Are you happy with what Microsoft is providing out of the box, or do you need something that is like fully branded, that matches your own kind of visual language or style? Let me just start with some simple options. What I'll do is, like, when I get to the kind of more interesting embedding patterns, I'll move between the slides and demos of what it looks like, of the actual patterns. So you get like a better feel of what can we do and what would it look like. But this is so like publishing, and this is about publishing an agent to Teams or M365, and it's not really an integration pattern. The only reason I mentioned this here and on the post as well, it's because that often it's just the best pattern, right? Or the best kind of publishing method, right? Like if you are happy with the UI, users already doing most of the work in Teams, then publishing to Teams or M365 is usually no-brainer, right? You don't have to really think about it. So if it's an employee-facing experience and you're okay with Teams, then just like publish your agent there. But sometimes we have some customers, we've seen some customers that want to embed the chat experience into a website. It can be an employee-facing website, something like an intranet portal. I don't know if people still use this word, but I do at least. Or it can be a customer-facing website where we want where it's a web experience. So we want to integrate a web chat canvas into that app. The simplest way of doing that is using something which is called the embed code from Copilot Studio. The instructions on how to do it are on the slide here. So I don't know if we'll share the deck later. Maybe Darren can do that. But the instructions are also in the post itself that I shared. The reason why you might want to use this pattern is because it's simple, right? You just get an embed code, like an iframe code from the Copilot Studio maker experience, which you can just put in your website. Otherwise, it's not a very flexible pattern, right? It only supports if you're familiar with the different auth methods in Copilot Studio, so it only supports manual authentication, which means that it cannot rely on WorkIQ or tenant graph grounding for knowledge, which means that for anything that is SharePoint or Copilot or Graph connectors, it will not rely on semantic search when it uses when you're embedding the chat canvas inside an employee portal or employee-facing experience. And it also doesn't support a single sign-on, like a seamless experience. It will always present this login card, which will open a separate tab. I have to say, like this has been like a much disliked experience by many of our customers. I think it's only there because it's so easy to set up, right? But so it's only if you really don't want to configure anything other than like putting that HTML embed code inside your website, you should use this. But otherwise, you should probably move to the patterns that's a little bit more complex. So just as a note, this is this embed or embedded iframe uses an SDK, a Microsoft SDK called WebChat, and this is the Microsoft hosted version of WebChat. So it's Microsoft hosting that web SDK. But there is also the self-hosted flavor of WebChat. WebChat is also available through an open source repo, which you can use, which you can reference, which gives you a lot of flexibility. So building a chat canvas using the self-hosted web chat, first of all, supports single sign-on. So you, if your employee is already authenticated with Entra and they sign into any sort of web experience that is protected with Entra, they won't get this kind of login button or magic code. They'll just be able to engage in a conversation. And another benefit here is that you can actually use the self-hosted web chat as kind of like a widget that you inject into different experience. So for instance, here, this is a screenshot from a sample that we have for ServiceNow, where the self-hosted web chat widget is actually injected into the ServiceNow self-service portal. That was a mouthful. You can do that for SharePoint. You can do it for ServiceNow. Basically, any platform that you can extend using JavaScript or flavors of JavaScript, you can also extend by injecting a web chat widget into it, which is really helpful, really nice. By the way, in the ServiceNow sample, we were able to do things such as listen to events because we're really extending the platform. We're able to listen to events that are happening on the self-service portal itself. So if the user knowledge base, for instance, the widget can intercept that event and say, hey, I see you've clicked on knowledge base. Here are some like interesting facts or something like that. So it gives you quite a bit of flexibility besides supporting single sign-on. One more thing that's important to know about self-hosted web chat, it can use two adapters which correspond to kind of two different APIs that we have. I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but those two APIs roughly correspond with employee-facing experiences as opposed to customer-facing. If you're building a customer-facing experience, you probably want to go with a direct line adapter, and then if you're building an employee-facing experience, you want to go with the M365 Agents SDK Copilot Studio client. Again, in the blog post, the link here at the bottom of the slide takes you to a section of the post where the different samples and options are being discussed. So you can see how to implement both. Let me just share a quick sample. Okay, so this is just a self-hosted web chat. It's not, let me just ask a quick question. So this is a vanilla sample that we have. You can just clone the sample and use it. It's not embedded into anything special. It just gets rendered now as a full page. But you can see that using that sample just gives you like the standard chat experience that you're familiar with from the test canvas, right? It's pretty much the same experience as in here in the Copilot Studio Maker experience, including the React buttons where you can go like or dislike, and including indications. So for instance, if I ask a question, you'll get this kind of thinking or analyzing experience. So it's really very, very close to what you get on the Copilot Studio chat canvas. And it's a good place to start from. You can customize this and make it kind of match whatever app or portal it's embedded into, like in a ServiceNow case, but you don't need to. You can just use this basic experience and get this seamless sign-on experience and embed it wherever you want. Let me just go back to the slides. It's going to be a little bit cumbersome. Okay, so another option or like a different pattern which gives you more control is something we can call bring your own UI, which means that you don't use web chat at all. You're just building your own chat experience over the APIs that we have and we make available. Why would you want to do that is a good question. I think that often it's actually this pattern is actually deployed in cases where it might not be necessary, but in some cases, some organizations want to use existing sort of chat frameworks, right? There are open source frameworks that are built specifically for chat experiences. Some organizations use those to deploy their own versions of like an enterprise chat GPT. I'll show you something that sort of matches that description. Or maybe you want to include very specific capability UI. Regardless, you might still want to look at customizing web chat, that SDK that I shared on the last slide, because with web chat, you can still get like a highly customized experience. You can still tailor like most of its behavior, look and feel. But again, there will be some instances, some scenarios where you want to bring your own UI to gain maximum control. You will face the same in terms of like which kind of API or adapter to choose. You'll face this pretty much the same decision as before. So if it's employee facing, you probably want to use the SDK client. With authenticate with Microsoft and tenant graph grounding. If it is customer facing, then you probably want to use direct line. Let me show you a couple of options that correspond with this. Okay, so let's start with this. This is, let me just ask a quick question. So this is Assistant UI, which is an open source React UI framework for conversational agents. And it gives you this kind of like ChatGPT-esque experience, which you can deploy in your own organization. So it gives you the multi-thread capability, prompts, streaming, a bunch of things that are built into the experience itself, and you can pretty easily extend it. So here, for instance, I was able to add this kind of like indicator for that tells me that the agent is reasoning, that it is calling tools, and I can kind of drill down and look at the tool inputs or outputs. But this is a thing, again, this is like a case where there's an organization that already uses like an industry standard chat experience or agentic UI experience, and they just want to embed Copilot Studio as another agent into that framework, right? So that, I think that would be one instance in which it would make sense to bring your own UI. Another experience or another example is this. This is a sample that we've built recently to just showcase the that I don't know if you've seen this already, but the new experimental enhanced task completion mode in Copilot Studio, which introduces like a new orchestration mode. Now, this orchestration mode, let me actually use a different prompt. This orchestration mode comes with pretty sophisticated reasoning capabilities over tools and connected agents. So we wanted to build a sample that would really highlight these steps and capabilities. Here, what I have is like a sample where there are two connected agents. It's an e-commerce sample. So the user here is chatting to an orders agent that is connected to one MCP server, which gives it access to orders and like similar information. And then behind the scenes, there is a warehouse management agent, so the one that is getting invoked now, which the orders management agent can chat with when it needs information about like inventory and anything else that is warehouse related. And we just wanted to highlight the different steps in the orchestration, or like the way that this enhanced task completion orchestrator is invoking different tools and connected agents, and a completely customized UI was like a good way to really flesh this out. So you can see that there are the different tools, and I can drill down into the inputs and outputs of each tools. I could see that the connected agent was running, it was blue, and I could drill down into the task that was giving to the connected agent, into the output, and then also the look at the response. So again, this is just like another case where it was where a custom UI, a completely customized UI was like a good idea, was reasonable. It's because we really wanted some very, very specific, like a very specific experience, highlight the specific capabilities in terms of how the orchestrator is reasoning. Any questions so far, by the way, that Giorgio hasn't tackled? Okay, I see that Giorgio's doing well. And now another pattern that this is going to be like I'm departing from customizing UI, and this is another pattern which we're seeing more and more with customers, which give customers more control over the payload, the messages that go back and forth between user chatting to the agent and the agent itself. So think about instances where usually we see this in regulated industries and financial institutions, where they say we're worried about users interacting with the agent, potentially sharing details that are sensitive. And at the same time, sometimes like they're also worried about certain details being shared by the agent. So they want more control. They want to have their own component that kind of stands in the middle between the user chatting to the agent and the agent itself, that gives them more control. Until recently, this hasn't been really possible. I know that like some customers have been doing that with the classic API that we have that's called Direct Line, which has its drawbacks when it comes to this pattern. There's an upcoming capability that will be supported by the Agents SDK Copilot Studio client that would let you interact with Copilot Studio agents with App ID authentication with Entra ID, which means that you can create your own service or your own connector that stands between your UI and Copilot Studio that will scan messages, transform them, maybe change the payload if anything needs to be changed, and it will be able to securely connect to Copilot Studio with an app ID. So here in this pattern, users are either unauthenticated or they authenticate with your own kind of either like a custom or third-party authentication provider, which isn't Entra, but it is your server itself that is authenticated against Entra and communicating with a Copilot Studio agent. So let me just show you a quick example. So this is a console app. It's not really a server-side connector, but it's just an app that kind of mimics what we can do inside a server. It's a console app written in Node, so you can use this as a server itself. So you can see when I start it up, it's telling me that it has some active redaction rules, right? So it listens to any message coming from the user. And it uses just like regular expressions to scan for any PII or any sensitive information, such as a social security number, credit card numbers. Obviously, this is like a very simplistic pattern. You don't really need to use regular expressions in your own servers. You can use servers that scan PII and sanitize it. But this is just an example. So let me just scroll down and say, hi, what can you do? Okay, I get a response. You can see this is like, because this is a console app, like everything is very verbose and I'm getting all the responses. And I'll just say, I need details.
Adi, yeah. we are seeing Cloud Code.
And not the terminal. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm guessing that you're seeing the terminal now.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Giorgio. So back to the terminal app. You can see that there are active redaction rules that apply to this conversation. And then I can say something like, what can you do? It's the same assistant that was published or like exposed earlier on the assistant UI interface. I'm getting responses and I can say, I need some details. My social security number is, which I think should be captured by the regular expression. Oh, no, sorry, I might have made a mistake, right? It's 3. That's 3 digits. Yeah, and you can see that now it was redacted, right? Because it is captured by this kind of middleware service before it gets into Copilot Studio. So yes, there are ways to also capture some information inside the agent itself, and this is much more like an involved pro code pattern. But again, there are some scenarios, and we do have some customers that need full control over the messages of the content that goes kind of between users interacting with the agent and Copilot Studio and the agent itself. And if you run this as your own server, it would let you scan the payload, scan the messages, and redact what it needs to. This is a similar pattern, but different in the sense that we sometimes see that, or there are cases where some servers aren't able to consume the SDK, right? Because the SDK client that we provide isn't like a raw API, right? You don't actually make calls to the underlying API that the SDK is using. And we only have 3 flavors for the SDK. It supports .NET, Python, and Node. But some servers don't actually support those stacks. So for instance, we have customers running Spring Boot, running Java servers. Or there are cases where specifically where Copilot Studio is integrated into such as ones built by Salesforce or ServiceNow. Those contact centers need to call Copilot Studio, but they need to do that over just like HTTP calls. This is a case where we would probably want to use the direct line API to call Copilot Studio, but there are some like major drawbacks to doing that. One is that direct line doesn't have this concept of end of response. So you know that if you've built agents in Copilot Studio, you know that your agent can send like an initial response, say hi, and then say, okay, let me check some details. It can go and invoke a flow from Power Automate, like an agent flow, retrieve details, and then send another response. So there was no like indication that the agent has completed its response. And specifically in Direct Line was built as an API that would let the agent send proactive notifications or proactive messages whenever it can. So using Direct Line for this integration pattern, you need to make this kind of like almost like this arbitrary assumption that after like n seconds or n messages that you received, the agent has completed the response. So that is like a challenge. We have some customers that work around this challenge by inserting some metadata into messages. Not something that we need to go into right now, but it's definitely a challenge. The line pattern is that if you are connected to direct line from your own chat client, then you probably you will implement something like a WebSocket client. But if you're connecting to direct line from your own server, you will have to continuously pull the get activities endpoint of the API, which typically will introduce latency. So if you are building a connector to Copilot Studio, if it's your server that's connected to Copilot Studio and not your kind of UI, not your chat client, you probably want to do it using the previous pattern, so the server-side connector, using the SDK client with the upcoming S2S with Entra ID, which will let you connect with an app ID, not with an authenticated user. Otherwise, you can also use the server-side connector with raw HTTP over direct line. And then one more pattern I wanted to share, and we can take some questions. So this is an SDK that I think largely has gone unnoticed. I don't know if like anyone knows this, but there's actually a native mobile SDK for Copilot Studio, which supports Android, iOS, and Windows. There's a repo for that SDK with a sample app for each platform, which you can clone and either use the sample app or build your own. This is just an example for an app which is a little bit more customized. Something which is also likely coming for now as a private preview is the ability to support voice through this mobile SDK. And we'll have a couple of flavors, but it's likely that it will also support real-time voice. So voice streaming that is managed by the OLM itself. But you don't necessarily need to use, voice doesn't need to be the only motivation for you to use this. most of our customers that are building customer-facing experiences typically want customers, users to be able to interact with the agent both on the web and mobile. And there are multiple cases where organizations have like their own employees interacting with agents on mobile, specifically for like field service scenarios, or any scenarios where you need to interact with the agent specifically on the go, and it can't happen through Teams if you want to have like a very, very specific user experience. I know that like I covered a lot, but let us maybe open the floor to some questions. Otherwise, I'll go into the specifics, more kind of into the specifics of some of these patterns. I'll scan. Are there any unanswered questions in the chat? And people should feel free to.
There might just be an improvement to the S2S. So for anyone looking to implement an S2S integration, what's the best path forward in the next month?
Okay, so it's actually like the S2S. Okay, let's maybe say something about S2S, that the upcoming S2S capability, and then we can speak about timelines. So let me just share my screen quickly with Copilot Studio. It will happen in a sec. Okay, so let's start from the fact that when we want to share an agent today, we can only share it with end users, right? Like with real users. So like when I bring up this sharing experience, I can only select security groups that have members who are users or specific users, which means that when this agent is authenticated, it expects a user identity or like a delegated token to be able to interact with this agent. A new capability that we are introducing now is one where you'll be able, as an agent builder, as a maker, you'll be able to share the agent with an app. So what you'll need to do on the Azure side is, let me just sign into Azure quickly. Right, wrong one. So in order to share a Copilot Studio agent with an app, you'll have to create an app registration in Azure, or your admin will need to do that, and give that app registration a specific permission. That permission will be the Copilot Studio.Copilot invoke, but the application permission. So let me just actually show you how this one can be added. Let's remove it. So when I click on add a permission, I go to APIs my organization uses, and then search for Power Platform. And if I want to build a user-facing experience, such as the one that we've seen before, so it's a UI that's connected to the agent, where the UI that's connected directly to the agent, then I choose delegated permissions. But if it is my server connecting to the agent using this new S2S pattern, I'm going to choose application permissions. And then the only option that I have is Copilot Studio.Copilot invoke. If I add that permission, and an admin in your organization needs to consent. So if an admin has consented to that permission, you'll be able to share your agent with that app ID. So in the new sharing experience, you'll be able to select the app ID as well. Once you do that, then when you build your server, when you build your connector, you will need to use a flow such as client credentials to obtain a token for the app. So you won't be identifying as the user, you'll be identifying with the app. And you'll be able to interact with the Copilot Studio agent. The benefit of doing that is that you get all the, you don't have to authenticate your users. You're able to maintain your own server that, as we said, that scans the payload, that keeps everything in check, but you also get all the protection that Entra ID gives you. So your Entra admins will still be able to monitor any sign-ins based on this app registration. They'll be able to use conditional access policy to govern how this app is used. So for instance, you'll be able to bind only your clients to this app registration. So maybe your clients are making calls from a specific set of IP addresses. Those IP addresses can be part of what you configure into the conditional access policy and effectively say that it's only your server that can speak to this Copilot Studio agent. So it's through this kind of trio of the app registration in Azure and the agent that gets shared with the app, and then your client that we get this style of communication.
Thank you, Adi. I take the chance to ask you if you remember if automated agents, automated agents that starts with a trigger, do honor the same 100-second timeout, or we have an increased timeout for automated agents?
In terms of waiting for a response?
Yeah, in terms of so there are some person in the chat, and you are free to open your mic, by the way, Priam, if you want, that signals that when they use Anthropic in automated agents, since Anthropic is slower in producing the responses, they face timeout.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like we so autonomous agents are just like conversational agents in that respect. So they will face a timeout. What I can say is that we're now starting to introduce another way of automating processes. I don't know if you've seen the new kind of workflow UI in Copilot Studio. If you haven't, let me share my screen quickly.
Yeah, that was shared. They are starting to explore it now, but maybe for the others, you can still share in a while.